You're listening to sermons from La Cañada Congregational Church and Pastor Kyle Sears. Join us in person every Sunday at 10 a.m. in La Cañada for worship. You can find more information about our church online at lacañadachurch.org.
Over the past couple of years, Kylie has been playing basketball for Glendale Community College, and it's been really fun to see how she has grown beyond whatever genetic gifts I've given her. Height, yes. Skill, no. But in her final year of high school and in college, I had to remind her of this astonishing reality. The last game you play, more likely than not, will be a losing game. The last point of your career, unless you go to the very top and end at the championship, will be one of disappointment. And so instead of telling her to win at all costs, I had to remind her to this same instruction that I gave when she was just starting out in life. Play hard, have fun, do your best. And what that means is that she would come home after games and we would talk about how she rebounded or how she blocked, but most of the conversation would center on what she said that made her teammates laugh when she was on the bench, or how she was able to get her coaches to crack a smile when they normally are stone-faced. It's sort of like what Wayne Gretzky said, you can't laugh at the jokes you don't make, something like that, I think. But it's hard to think about losing in life. We want to win, and it's hard to give teaching to your children that says that winning isn't everything. The question of what it means to win, what does it mean to be victorious, and is maybe there a different game we should be playing? All this is kind of brought up in the final thoughts that John shares with his followers as he writes in 1 John 5, verse 1 through 6. Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God, and everyone who loves the parent loves the child. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and obey his commands. For the love of God is this, that we obey his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome, for whatever is born of God conquers the world. And this is the victory that conquers the world, our faith. Who is it that conquers the world but the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? This is the one who came by water and blood, Jesus Christ, not with the water only, but with the water and the blood. And the Spirit is the one that testifies, for the Spirit is the truth. And so John, approaching the end of this writing, begins to focus it more on the goal of our faith, the place that we aim so that we would remain focused whenever life's ups and downs hit us. And he wants his community of faith to be winners, conquerors, victorious, he'll say, but winners in a different sort of way. Winners that will reject the false notion that victory comes through power or coercion or force. Instead, John will say that faith in Jesus as the Son of God and the implications of that faith strike at the heart of what it means to find victory. And it is obedience to that sort of faith that John says will conquer the world. It's not about winning or losing, but how you play the game is what he says. Now, it's easy to read a text like this as a form of triumphalism, where we establish ourselves as those who believe in Jesus as better than everyone else, because we have come to the truth of faith while they remain there in their unbelief. We are the conquerors, and we should go out conquering, is how it's often told. And I think it's easy to read this text in this way because we have been immersed in this culture where there are winners and losers. This system that has trained our brains to imagine that we either are on top or at the bottom. But if we've been paying attention to John's writings, we're going to know how upside down this game really is. That throughout his writing, he is puncturing this mystique that there are people who are better than others, and instead is using this idea of love as a way that makes access to God easy for everyone. And that as we embody that sort of love, we are therefore also making room for everyone at the table. And here's how we know how upside down this game really is that Jesus, as our example, suffers and dies. That Jesus will welcome the poor and the powerless, and will challenge the conventions of powerful rulers. That Jesus' life and ministry were aimed away from rule in the way that often people imagined the winners get to rule. And so we read in this text specifically some sort of irony as John is writing, giving Jesus titles like Son of God and Christ. Those are language built with themes of kingship. That the Son of God, we all know, was Caesar in Rome. That the Christ, the anointed one, is the one who's been marked by Zeus himself as the ruler over everything. This sense of kingship and deity within these connotations is ironic because Jesus doesn't look much like a king and even less like a God. And yet that is the direction our faith must go, where outward conventions do not accurately portray the reality. That our faith will claim that Jesus is indeed the Son of God and the Christ, the one who rules over heaven and earth and all of the cosmos across space and time, and yet was a first century Jewish man from the sticks. And because Jesus doesn't fit these common standards, we have to ask, what sort of king then is Jesus? What sort of God have we placed our faith in? And to go back to his theme, John will answer, the one who is defined by love. A love that has been established in heaven but is not locked there for the king to participate in without sharing to minions, but instead a love that overflows from heaven into earth, from us to others. That God is love and the Spirit will communicate truth to us, John says, when we see that Jesus is the fullest expression of that love given to us. And so he says that if we love God, someone who is defined by love, then we are called children of God, capable then of loving not just the God of love, and not just ourselves as recipients of that love, but all of God's children, recognizing in them that they too have been given this blessing of love. When new children come into our lives, whether from our own or from friends and relatives who have kids, what we find, maybe surprisingly, is that our love is not divided to make additional room. Well, there's one more kid, and so I'm going to have to love these a little bit less so that I can love this one some more too. That's only how their savings for college work, I think, is you got to take from them and give to them. But the way love works is it actually multiplies. And that when nieces and nephews come into our life, or we become aunts and uncles of friends and neighbors, what we find is that love doesn't have to be divided now and lessened among those that we know, but instead it just finds new ways of being expressed, growing within us to encompass new additions to our life. And that, as far as John is concerned, is how the world is conquered, how we find victory. Not through implements of death that work through division and subtraction, and not through implements of power that only work through addition and accumulation. Instead, what John will say is that love wins because love multiplies. The love begins to see in every human reality a child of God. And that our love and devotion to God, who we cannot see, is then met in reality with the ones that we do. That the love that we share with others is not lost because it begins in God and then flows from there. And toward the end of this writing, John then will begin to conflate this idea of love and faith, mixing them together. And it becomes difficult to untangle the two. It's hard to see where John is separating out the expressions of our faith that follow the commands of Jesus, that trust in what God has told us to do, and the love that pushes us into that new reality. that belief and action begin to implicate one another. Because I believe and trust in God, I will act in love, and then as I am acting in love, my trust grows more and more sure. We want to say one is the heart and one is the head, one is the hand and one is the mouth. The reality in the way that John will say it is that it's hard to divide where faith and love begin if we're doing it right. This passage contains some echoes found in the latter part of Deuteronomy, where Moses appears before the people as they prepare to enter into the land and sets before them a very simple yet stark choice. Choose life or choose death. There's one way of being as we enter into this land of the unknown that will help us flourish as a people, and there is one way of being that will lead to our ruin. God's commands will bring life in the land. If we ignore them, we perish. And what we find is that for the people of God, their faith and confidence in God will influence the way they live in the land. We don't have to read too far in Deuteronomy or in 1 John to see that the way we think about God and the teachings of God has implications on the way we behave. Will we love others or will we ignore them? Will we confess Jesus as Christ and Son of God, or will we deny it? How we answer one can lead us to seeing how we might answer the other. And so Jesus then becomes a model for this tension of, are we more strict in the ways we trust in this doctrine that's been handed down for 2,000 years, or are we really more of just, I got to feel it in my bones in the way I act, and I'm not so worried about how I think. This human and divine kind of mixing can sometimes be a tension in us. There's this emulsification of faith and action at work, that as we blend them together, it becomes hard to pull them apart of how we think and how we act. And this sort of emulsification is similar to what we know of Jesus, both human and divine, embodied together, somehow overlapping heaven and earth together. John will describe this as, it is by water and blood that Jesus comes to us in faith. There's layers of meaning here, that it is this physical birth of Jesus that contains both water and blood in that stable in Bethlehem. But water is also this way of Jesus' baptism, when the Spirit would land upon Jesus in the form of a dove, and the voice would say, "This is my beloved Son." While the blood, of course, represents Jesus' death, pointing us to the spiritual vocation of who Jesus is, and yet the very real human suffering found within that vocation. By the blood of Christ, we receive salvation, and by the water, we receive the Spirit. It is both a tangible reality for us and something beyond what we see and hear. At the core of these symbols, then, no matter how we read them, is one of the earliest confessions of the church. 3 simple words: Jesus is Lord, King, ruler, over all things. And that is what unites us. Not the other stuff that might feel important, like how we vote or what language we speak or the methods of baptism or communion or, should the Welch's or off-brand or wine or whatever, But that's not often the way we hear when we think about religious circles. We are told, well, you're either Catholic or Protestant, or you either believe in God or you don't. We're told that the other side is evil, deep state actors, selfishly greedy and untrustworthy. We're told to not share a meal with them. Don't listen to them. But instead, in this way of loving, what we are told is to love them like they were God's kids. And when we confess that Jesus is Lord, it is easier to do that. Because if Jesus is Lord, then that is the supreme victor, conqueror, power. But again, not a power that comes through force, but instead, the one that rules all things political and religious and personal and cultural and makes room. The way that Jesus rules with love for everyone is the way that we are meant to live. And so the commands to do these things, the commands to love our neighbors as ourselves, can seem a little ridiculous in a world that is so fractured. Some political strategists have suggested that the minority should fight the way that they fought when they were in the majority, to increase the polarization that exists so that one way or the other, someone's coming out on top. And John will say that these commands do seem foolish if they are attempted outside of faith in God's love. That these commands seem too pie in the sky, too naive. In a world that's dog eat dog, zero-sum game, then it might feel dangerous to welcome the stranger. If my opponent is poised to attack me, then shouldn't I have a weapon of my own? Behind my back, I'm no fool. But I don't see attempts to love one another as naive. They are necessary. And that's something that we do as individuals, but also as a people called by God. That is the victory that comes when we remind the world that love is the way the game was meant to be played all along. That love is the way we win. Not just us, but anybody. The rules of mistrust and betrayal only make everyone lose. So we need to be reminded that it's not about winning and losing. It's how we play the game. It's how we love. And so I guess my sermon could be summed up in the same instructions that I gave my kids when they were young, and just learning how to play. Play hard, hustle, do your best, and have fun. Because even if we lose, we have faith that Christ's love remains. And so we can be joyous in knowing that as a people who embody loss, we also embody love. My hope is that we would be willing to put ourselves in the very vulnerable reality of this necessary sort of love that discovers those in need and moves to them, that the Spirit would show us how in our love for God, we find love for others. Amen.